Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Access Blockbusters Pod. Thank you so much for joining us. It is always an honor to have all of you guys listening to the Access Blockbusters Pod. Thank you so much, really genuinely mean it. I know I say this at the beginning of every podcast episode, but really just hearing your guys' thoughts and being able to interact with all of you in the comments and hearing what you have to say about all these different topics, it really does mean a lot to me. Up front, before we get into this podcast, you might have already been able to notice my voice is a little bit gone. A lot can change over 7 days, I guess, is the lesson here. But yeah, I'm getting over a little bit of something. I don't think I was particularly sick. I just lost my voice about a week ago, literally almost right after I recorded last week's episode. And so here we are. It's coming back, and I am almost willing to 100% guarantee you that it'll be totally fine by next week's episode. But for now, please bear with me. Hopefully it'll still be an enjoyable episode nonetheless. So guys, thank you so much again for joining us. It is Access Blockbusters Pod, and we have some really interesting things to talk about today, including not the usual DC, Marvel, Star Wars stuff for the most part. We do have one bit of Star Wars news, but for the most part, it's actually things in other franchises that are going on. This is obviously Access Blockbusters, and once in a while I'll talk about Oscar films and things of that nature, and I'm hoping, now that I have a little bit more time, hopefully to see some movies, that in December and January, do a series on all the Oscar films. We could do a podcast about all of them, which would be, I think, just something a little bit different. I know this is Access Blockbusters, but I like to branch out a little and see what's out there, obviously. But yeah, I mean, today we're going to be talking about things like Ted Lasso Season 4, a show that I love. I don't get to talk about it that much on the channel. Jurassic World 4, Jurassic World 4, Jurassic Park movie 7, I don't know, the next Jurassic World film. We'll be doing a little bit of Star Wars. We'll be talking about Sigourney Weaver, and then we'll be ending the episode by doing a big review, spoiler breakdown of episodes 1 through 3 of Rings of Power Season 2. So yeah, look forward to all of that, guys, and without further ado, actually, before we get into all the, the normal stuff, if you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters channel, if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. I love hearing your guys' comments. I respond to almost every single one of them. So if you have a thought about any of these topics, let me know in the comments down below. And thank you so much. Make sure to subscribe to the Access Blockbusters channel on the Access Blockbusters Pod. And if you're listening on Spotify, thank you so much as well. Let me know how the experience is going over there. If you just prefer the audio, yes, this podcast is on Spotify, so leave a rating and let me know how you're enjoying the podcast there. And with all that out of the way, guys, let's get into our topics for today's episode. So we're going to start out, like I mentioned, with a show that I think doesn't get enough love. And I think that's kind of funny. Maybe I should rephrase that. A show that doesn't get enough love from people who are probably listening to this podcast, because it's a show that doesn't have anything to do with superheroes. It's really hardly any action in the traditional sense. But it's a show, and it's also a show that's not on one of the quote-unquote big major streaming platforms. I mean, we could consider Apple TV Plus one of the up-and-comers, but it's not on Netflix or Disney Plus or Max or anything like that. But Ted Lasso is, quite frankly, one of my favorite shows I've ever seen. Now, if you've seen the most recent season of Ted Lasso, I was not, I wasn't as over the moon about Ted Lasso Season 3 as I was about Seasons 1 and 2. But, I mean, that's such a high bar to clear. I remember, I think about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, I first started to watch Ted Lasso and caught up just in time when Season 3 was starting. And I was just so pleasantly surprised with a show that is not a traditional sitcom. Like, there is a more straightforward story going on there. Although with Season 3, I think it started to get a little bit distracted here and there with subplots and things of that nature. But, for the most part, it is a very traditional kind of show. But as someone who's not a big soccer fan, I'm more of a baseball fan myself. But as someone who isn't a big soccer fan, I was just so surprised at how I was able to connect and resonate with this story that was going on about a sport that I, thought I would find, a little not hard to understand, but just hard to connect with on that level. And then characters that I didn't even know. And by the end of it, Roy Kent, Ted Lasso, obviously, Rebecca, even Nate's redemption arc, I just, Akili, I love the characters in this show. And I think that it's such a wonderful reminder to just be kind and to do the right thing. It's a show that it plays on cliches, obviously. Ted Lasso is just this kind of classic Midwestern guy who just loves, what he does. He loves life, but he goes through things. He went through a lot of mental health struggles, I think, in season 3. Obviously went through a divorce, and it's a lot for him, but it's a reminder of what good people can do. So anyways, all that to say, this is sort of my pitch to you guys. If you are mostly watching shows like Peacemaker and WandaVision and whatnot, take a chance on this show. If you have that free trial on Apple TV Plus or whatever, would really, encourage you guys to take a chance on this show. Anyways, for those of you who are fans of Ted Lasso, we... Not to, majorly spoil the ending of season 3, but Jason Sudeikis, who plays Ted Lasso and is one of the writers and executive producers of the show, has always maintained that it was going to be a 3-season arc for Ted Lasso. And you saw that progressing, right? There's a very natural way in which each season encapsulates one of those 3 sort of pillars of this story, right? Without going into too much detail for those of you who haven't seen it yet. And so obviously with the end of season 3, we saw at least part of Ted Lasso's story come to a somewhat natural conclusion, right? The ending seemed very explicit in how it was doing that. However, a lot of us, myself included, if somebody were to approach us and say, hey, would you be interested in a Ted Lasso season 4? AKA, would you just be interested in spending, 8 more hours of on-screen time with these characters? Without hesitation, I would say yes, because at this point, I know that the story came to a very nice conclusion in season 3 and whatnot, but it's just about spending more time with these characters in a way that's endearing and heartwarming. And as long as Jason Sudeikis has the creative energy and the creative drive to do so, I would just love to do that. I love to see that. And so it was kind of up in the air, right? And we finally now got confirmation about a year maybe after season 3 that season 4 looks like it is more likely. Not going to say confirmed, this segment is not Ted Lasso season 4 confirmed, but it is more likely than it ever has been before. And the reason I say that is because the options on the contract for 3 actors in the show, 3 prominent actors in the show, that being, those being Hannah Waddington, who plays Rebecca, who is, one of the critical figures in the show, obviously. Brett Goldstein, who plays Roy Kent, and also for those of you, MCU fans, he was Hercules in 5 seconds of Thor: Love and Thunder. And Jeremy Swift, who plays Higgins, who is Rebecca's assistant. Those 3 actors have been basically their options on their contracts have been picked up, and they are returning, or at least if they are going to do a season 4, they are basically on the books to do it, which is exciting because it appears that, this show kind of lives and dies by Jason Sudeikis. It's not one of those shows where, we can move on without the star. The show is called Ted Lasso. It was based on those, I think, NBC skits that were done by Jason Sudeikis a while ago, where he was playing this character of Ted Lasso and, kind of pretending to be goofy and whatnot and all that kind of stuff. And so, it's really his show. And the fact that the studio is even willing to think about, picking up these options and saying, let's go for a season 4, it's going to happen, I think is actually a really good sign. Because what's key in this announcement is that Jason Sudeikis himself is not, returning yet. And other actors like, Brendan Hunt, for example, their options or their contracts have not been re-signed, because I believe that some of these actors have contracts in which you can have options that are picked up, and some, like Jason Sudeikis, don't. And so, again, not a guarantee that Ted Lasso season 4 is coming, but honestly, if you can make a Toy Story 4 after an ending such as Toy Story 3, you can make a Ted Lasso season 4 and you can make it well. What the story will be, I'm not sure. It's not as clear as it was after the end of, season 1. You go, okay, this is what the story of season 2 is going to be. At the end of season 2, you go, we got it. We know what season 3 is going to be about. Season 4, who knows? But again, at the end of the day, just spending any more time with these characters, I would just be so delighted and so overjoyed to see Ted Lasso back on my TV screen one more time. So let me know in the comments down below. First of all, have you checked out Ted Lasso at all? And if you have, let me know what you think about the show. I love it. It's just one of my favorites. And are you excited about a potential season 4, or should they have ended it at season 3 if they're going to keep going? Let me know in the comments down below. Let's move on from Ted Lasso, though, and let's head on to another very popular franchise. This one is going to be one that is, I think, exclusively on the big screen. It is one of the most lucrative franchises in Hollywood history. We are talking about Jurassic World. Now, just to give a little bit of context about my personal feelings about the new Jurassic World films, because obviously, like everybody, and I'm not, I mean, hyperbole, obviously. If you don't like the original Jurassic Park, totally fine. Just know you're in the minority, but totally fine if you don't like the original Jurassic Park. I am in the majority, the vast, vast majority. The original Jurassic Park film and book, by the way, I really enjoy the book as well. The original Jurassic Park film is just a classic. It's one of those films that was made, I guess now almost 30 years ago. And exactly 30 years ago? I could be wrong, but maybe exactly 30 years ago. And it just holds up. It is a classic. It's amazing. Just incredible what the technology was with the CGI and everything like that. And then obviously, we all remember in 2015, they rebooted it with Jurassic World to massive success, at $1.6 billion, I think, something like that. Crazy amounts of success. They did Fallen Kingdom, I think in 2018, which, was a movie. And then last year, or maybe 2 years ago in 2022, they did Jurassic World Dominion. And we kind of thought that would be the end of the franchise. Now, from my perspective, just to kind of quickly give my thoughts before we get into this news here, I enjoyed the first film. In fact, it came out at a time when I think that film was kind of made for people around my age. It was just sort of a fun dinosaur film. And at that time, I had seen the original Jurassic Park, but, didn't have that appreciation of it that I do now. And so it was definitely a film that I enjoyed for what it was, but, it just wasn't crossing my mind of like, oh, maybe this isn't as good as the original or whatever. Like, that didn't matter to me at all. It was Jurassic World. Jurassic Park was back. Dinosaurs were back with new CGI. Didn't even think about, Bryce Dallas Howard's character, who I just can't remember her name in that film, but, wearing heels. I wasn't even thinking about any of that kind of stuff. So I enjoyed the first film in the rebooted trilogy. And then the second film came out, and that was one of the films, I think 2018 or 2019 when that film came out, that I remember just really being like, this is not a good film, in my opinion. And even at that time, while I was, writing about films on a blog and, starting to think more critically about movies in a different way, even at that point, I was still more positive on most of the films. I'm still pretty positive on most things I see just because I tend to want to enjoy things that I watch. But even then, at that time, I walked out of Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom and I was like, this was not an enjoyable experience. And there were a lot of reasons why, the clone girl and sort of just the circular nature of everything just running around and everyone running around the auction and whatnot. So not my favorite film. For sure. And then, we all came back to see Jurassic World Dominion because the original cast came back and we were all like, well, now that the dinosaurs are roaming the earth, who knows, right? Who knows, if this could be a different take because everything's kind of they've been on an island and what are they going to do? And so this is a little different. Turns out it was different, but in a very odd way in which we were dealing with locusts and bugs and everything like that. So it was a little strange. Not my favorite movie. And so, the excitement for Jurassic World is kind of diminished for me. That being said, for audiences, well, yes, none of the sequels have ever made nearly as much as that first Jurassic World film. They've grossed a lot of money. In fact, I don't know if all of them have made $1 billion, but I think at least 2 out of 3 of them have. So this is a money-making franchise. And I mean, with an IP that is sort of as evergreen, if you will, as Jurassic Park, Jurassic World, which is kind of ironic given the dinosaurs went extinct. But I mean, kids at least are always going to love dinosaurs, right? And just seeing dinosaurs and running around with them is always going to be a fun experience. And so, while I thought that there would be a reboot at some point, I didn't think it would be that soon. Well, it turns out that I think just 3 years after the last Jurassic Park film, Jurassic World Dominion, we are getting another film in the franchise. It'll be Jurassic World Rebirth, and we have some new details about the film, which is very interesting. So first of all, the cast. The cast is very interesting. It'll be headlined by Mahershala Ali, who is still waiting for Blade and Blade's script and Blade to get a director, Blade to even get off the ground, which is crazy. Mahershala Ali, in the meantime, will be part of this Jurassic World Rebirth film. You have Scarlett Johansson, another MCU, well, I was going to say another MCU alum. Mahershala Ali has not been in the MCU proper, but, another MCU adjacent figure, obviously, is Black Widow. And so those two will be headlining the film. Really interesting because those two are Academy Award level actors. Not to say that, it loses credibility when you have Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard, but it's a little bit of a different caliber, right? When you get Mahershala Ali and Scarlett Johansson to join a Jurassic Park film, right? I think that that's also really exciting. So casting is really interesting. Casting is pretty spot on. And now we get some details. So first of all, the film is coming out next year, July 2nd, 2025, which is literally in 10 months. Kind of crazy to think about, considering I think 3 or 4 months ago, we had no idea this film was even happening at all. And then now we find out it's filming, or it's filmed. I think it's finished filming, actually. It's done. It's heading into post-production, and we're going to see this film come to the big screen. Now, in terms of other news surrounding Jurassic World Rebirth, we actually have some plot details as well. And so I'm just going to read some quotes from this article here that talk about what we have learned about the film. So this article says, according to an official summary, the film will be set 5 years following the events of Jurassic World Dominion, when, quote, the planet's ecology has proven largely inhospitable to dinosaurs. So kind of interesting. This is now my commentary. Kind of interesting that we're kind of heading back to the original. The Earth is unable to suit dinosaurs, and what happens now that dinosaurs are roaming the Earth again, but it's proven that not all of them can really survive in this planet. Kind of interesting premise there. So that's the first half of this quote. The second half of the quote offers a little bit more insight into what the story is going to be about. So let's read the second half here. Quote, those remaining exist in an isolated equatorial environment with climates resembling the one in which they once thrived. The synopsis continues. The 3 most colossal creatures within that tropical biosphere hold the key to a drug that will bring miraculous life-saving benefits to humankind. End quote. So this is really interesting, right? Because, I mean, as it seems like, and I could be wrong, they could all be on an island for all I know. But it seems like we're kind of moving past the whole survive the island kind of thing, which is fun. I mean, obviously the first Jurassic Park and Jurassic World 2, Lost Kingdom, like it's all been there. It's been there, done that, and you can do it very well. Like if the synopsis said Scarlett Johansson's character and Mahershala Ali's character try to survive an island with dinosaurs, I'd be like, okay, not thrilled about that, but let's see how entertaining you can make it is sort of what my take on that would have been. The fact that they're going a little bit of a different route, which this also kind of screams a little bit Jurassic World Dominion, in my opinion. The locusts being this key to I don't even remember what the locusts were there for, honestly. But you have this idea of maybe a life-saving cure. Maybe it's the cure for cancer or something, Alzheimer's, something like that, which would be really interesting, I think. And there's actually then now a different reason. Like it's almost like the humans want to get the dinosaurs. They've always wanted to experiment on the dinosaurs, which is a really sad thing. But now this is a little bit different because it's almost like humans trying to, find the dinosaurs and collect DNA or collect blood or whatever, and in an effort to kind of save humanity. I think that's an actually really interesting twist on this whole premise. So really exciting, actually, to hear that this Jurassic World film will be heading in a slightly new path than the original ones. I think that's really where you should go. And honestly, most of my excitement for this film rests on the fact that you have 2 of the best actors who are working in the 21st century, and they're signed on to this film, which is again a really exciting thing. Just because you don't just get Mahershala Ali and Scarlett Johansson to sign up for things like this. They have money for days. Mahershala Ali, obviously 2-time Academy Award winner, and Scarlett Johansson, I think Academy Award nominated actress, if I'm not mistaken. Obviously for Marriage Story and others, but also has millions and millions of dollars. It's not just about money for her anymore. So really interested to see where this goes from here. So let me know in the comments down below. Are you excited about Jurassic World Rebirth? This is, I guess, the 4th film, or maybe a soft reboot, but they're keeping the Jurassic World title. That's kind of interesting. Maybe, you would have thought that if you're completely rebooting the franchise, or not completely rebooting, but doing sort of a bigger soft reboot, you could have done like Jurassic Kingdom or Jurassic Planet or whatever. But they're keeping Jurassic World. It's going to be called Jurassic World Rebirth, which is really interesting. And let me know what you think about the title, think about the filming, think about the release date, and most of all, think about the plot details. Let me know in the comments down below. All right, so as promised, we are going to discuss a little bit, of the big 3, Marvel, Star Wars, DC, that we talk about all the time on this channel. I thought it would be fun, though. I thought, it'd be kind of fun to do an episode where we talk about things in other franchises, especially because Marvel and DC and Star Wars are relatively quiet, which will change very soon. Obviously, The Penguin is coming out, I think, in a week, and Agatha All Along is coming out in a couple weeks. So, of course, that'll change. But, it's been fun talking about topics outside of those big franchises. But anyways, we're back to talking about the big franchises. So, yeah, we have a little bit of news on the new, and I say new, the first Star Wars film to be released post-Skywalker Saga, and that is The Mandalorian and Grogu. Obviously, the continuation of the Mandalorian TV show. The thing that really kicked off the Disney Plus era for better and for worse, and kind of, brought Star Wars to a place where it is, it's gone through its ups and downs, right? Mandalorian Season 1 was beloved. Season 2 was fairly well regarded, obviously, with the ending. But then Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, The Acolyte, Ahsoka, and or obviously being the other shining exception where it was very well received by critics. But yeah, a lot of ups and downs here. But we're going to be back with Star Wars next December, not next December, December 2026. We're going to be back with another Star Wars film, The Mandalorian and Grogu, and it looks like we are getting underway with new casting announcements. So obviously, legend of the business, Sigourney Weaver has confirmed, because we knew this, I guess, based on the trades a couple weeks ago, that Sigourney Weaver was going to be in The Mandalorian and Grogu, but now she has officially confirmed it herself. Sigourney Weaver will be joining the cast of The Mandalorian and Grogu, which I think is exciting news. I think that having an actress of this caliber is going to be a really big deal, just to kind of join the likes of Pedro Pascal, who I hope will be a part of the film for a lot more than he was, in all of seasons 1 through 3, and even in the Book of Boba Fett as well. Hoping that he, kind of is a bigger presence in this film. And then, Sigourney Weaver made comments, obviously, about the other half of that title. She said, "I just got a chance to meet Grogu," which is really exciting, really cute. It's just a, animatronic or a doll. But still, I think it's a nice sign that we're getting closer to progress with this new Mandalorian film, just simply because, it's been such a long time since we've gotten anything Star Wars on the movie screen other than re-releases that they do once in a while or whatever. And I think it's a question of, look, because she's done this before, right? And I'm not talking about Alien or whatever, like many years ago. I'm talking about recently. And recently, I mean, maybe 10 years ago, but with the Defenders, right? Like, she's been in these modern franchises, comic book and Star Wars, franchises. She's done this recently. And so I'm excited because I thought that for what you think about, whatever you think about the Defenders, the TV show that was the culmination of Daredevil, Jessica Jones, Iron Fist, and Luke Cage, I actually really enjoyed Defenders, but I think that Sigourney Weaver was a really strong presence in that show. Again, whatever you think about the show itself, I think that Sigourney Weaver was a particularly strong presence in the Defenders. And so I think that, just having Sigourney Weaver be in this project, again, kind of shows that we're kicking this project off finally. I know that there was sort of a concept trailer shown at D23, but I think that having, more talent added, and I'm sure we're going to get even more casting announcements over the next coming days. I hope it's not just Sigourney Weaver and Pedro Pascal and Zeb and Grogu. That would be kind of sad if it was, but we'll see. It remains to be seen. Is she the villain? Is she another hero? Who knows? But always exciting to get, really high top level talent to come join a Star Wars show. So let me know what you think about the casting of Sigourney Weaver in the comments down below. And guys, that'll bring us to our final segment of the show. I know that this has been a relatively light podcast episode, but don't worry guys, this next segment will probably take up, a good chunk of time because I have a lot to talk about here. So for those of you who have been, keeping up with the new TV shows that have been coming out, there has been a little show from a kind of, niche small franchise. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. It's called Lord of the Rings, and a new season of, or I should say, the first few episodes of a new season of The Rings of Power have dropped on Amazon Prime Video. The Rings of Power, and this kind of shocked me as I was preparing for this episode. I was taking notes. This kind of shocked me here, but if anyone, and if any of you have been around the channel long enough to remember, I actually did a review of the first 3 episodes of the first season, or maybe first 2 episodes of the first season of The Rings of Power. That's how long this channel has been around. And I don't mean that to say, it's been like 2.5 years, I think, since the last season of Rings of Power, which is, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. So yeah. This channel has been around long enough to have talked about the first season of Rings of Power, and now we're here talking about the second season of Rings of Power. And just to give a little bit of a background before we jump into it, and this is going to be a full spoiler discussion because, well, for a couple of reasons. These episodes were super long. They're and that's a good thing, by the way. Just I said super long almost as if I was, criticizing that. No, I think that's a fine thing in general. I think you'd prefer to have longer episodes of most shows. Obviously, if they're bad, you don't want longer episodes. But, in general, we'd prefer to have longer episodes of TV shows, especially the good ones. So these are long episodes. They released 3 at once. And so I was definitely not able to finish all of them when they first came out. Not even the second day they came out. I, just before recording this episode, actually have finished watching the 3rd episode. And so the thoughts are fresh in my mind. And I was unfortunately not able to get any early access to the episodes or anything like that. So yeah, just saw the first 3 episodes. And so because of that, and also because I just want to talk in greater detail about what I saw and what I observed and what I'm hoping to see in future episodes, this is going to be a full spoiler discussion. And the way that I'm going to do it is going to be pretty similar to how I've been doing these rewatch podcast episodes, or at least the DCEU ones, excuse me. If you watched the previous one I did on Man of Steel, it was almost a play-by-play of the film, which I thought was kind of fun because it allowed me to go through my notes again and really go through all the major points of the film. This is obviously not going to be that long, even though these 3 hours were basically the length of a longer feature-length film. I didn't take that many notes. I just took notes on certain things that I was noticing, little thematic elements, character moments, and things of that nature. And so we're going to kind of be going through each episode, one episode at a time, and then I'll talk about sort of the overall holistic thoughts at the end as we do that. But yes, this will be a spoiler discussion of the first 3 episodes of The Rings of Power. Before we get into that, though, speaking of season 2, I just want to give some quick context on season 1 and how I thought about it, so you guys know, so you guys understand where my thoughts are coming from. I think it's always important, because I think we all think about and have different opinions and differing thoughts on these episodes of TV and these films, and because of that, I think it's actually even more important that I tell you where I'm coming from, what my experience was with the first season of Rings of Power, and even more so with The Lord of the Rings, because just like just about everyone, I am a huge fan. I've actually just started rereading The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, just for fun, and it's great. I love Tolkien. I love his writing. The first book has been great so far, and I've read the books many times. But it's just a fun thing for me to do, to revisit certain books that I love, especially the ones that I read as a kid. But yeah, I love the Lord of the Rings books. I love the films. I haven't actually done the whole, extended edition marathons. I might have seen a couple extended editions, maybe not though. And so that's definitely something that I'll have to do eventually, watch all the 4-hour cuts of those films. But I love the theatrical cuts, at least. They're amazing films. It's not a coincidence that they were all nominated, I think, for Best Picture, if I'm not mistaken, or at least we know that the last one was, and the last one won Best Picture at the Oscars because it's just phenomenal. There's no wrong answer when someone asks you, what's your favorite Lord of the Rings film? Definitely no wrong answer. And I actually even enjoyed the Hobbit films. I love the book. And I thought, well, obviously, I have a couple videos, I think, on the YouTube channel about that Hobbit series, especially one where I talk about how I could have fixed it, facetiously kind of, but just talking about how it should have been shorter and whatnot. But at any rate, I thought that those 3 films at least had some of the spirit of Middle-earth that I enjoyed a lot. And so, even if they weren't the perfect films, and even if they weren't anything close to Lord of the Rings, I still enjoyed them quite a lot. And so coming into season 1 of The Rings of Power, I was a little skeptical. I was, how are they going to recapture any of the magic that was the Lord of the Rings? But I was also excited because it's new Lord of the Rings content. And the trailers looked promising. I knew that Amazon had spent a ton of money on this show. And so it was, definitely something that I was interested in. Obviously, I had heard about things like young Galadriel, young Elrond, and I think that was intriguing as well, to see where the show was going to go. That being said, the first season of Rings of Power, and I've only seen it once through, but was profoundly boring to me. And I'm not even going to say disappointing, because I think at a certain point early on in the season, I kind of understood what was going on and what my expectations should be throughout the remaining episodes. And so I don't even think by the time I finished The Rings of Power that I was disappointed, because I think very quickly I just kind of realized this is what these episodes are going to be like. They're not super enjoyable to watch. They're vaguely interesting. They have vaguely interesting bits of lore, but not that interesting to watch. I don't think I ever got attached to any particular subplot, any particular character. I think there were way too many subplots and way too many characters, which I know that it seems like an interesting criticism to make, given how the Lord of the Rings films are so expansive and so vast. And to be fair, I mean, I'm not the big Lord of the Rings aficionado. I don't know every single person's name. It takes me, rewatching each of the films to kind of be like, oh, that's Theoden, and that's that's Faramir, that all those kinds of things. And so I not having that kind of affinity to those characters, I get that. That's not, necessarily a bad thing. But I think what the Lord of the Rings films did really well is they centralized all these plots with characters you actually cared about. So you had Aragorn going off and recruiting all the ghosts right at the end of Return of the King. And then you had, I think it was Merry and Pippin, with the king as they marched. And you had Merry and Pippin with at the Battle of Helm's Deep, I think, or now I'm getting things mixed up. But you know what I mean, right? Like at the Battle of Helm's Deep, you had Legolas and Gimli, right? So you have characters that are attached to these subplots where, like not everything, you're not going to remember every single detail unless you're just that big of a Lord of the Rings fan, which kudos to you. I wish I could be. But you had characters that you really cared about on top of obviously the central plot of Frodo and Sam and then Gollum later on carrying the ring to Mordor. So I just thought that the first season didn't really have any characters that I could attach to, and subsequently I didn't think that any of the storylines were that interesting that I could attach to. So when season 2 was announced, and I don't even think I realized they were making season 2. I mean, you knew that they were going to do it because you had spent that much money, and unless the seasons just flopped that hard, you were going to make a season 2 to try to push your luck even further, try to improve upon season 1. And so when I heard season 2 was coming imminently, I was pretty lukewarm, honestly. I thought, I'll watch it, obviously. I watch most, if not all, sci-fi, fantasy, big blockbuster kind of content. But I just wasn't excited about it. There was nothing there that made me go, oh, this is what I'm really excited about season 2. Then I saw the trailers, and people were ecstatic about the trailers. And I went, yeah, no, these are good trailers. But I also remember thinking, well, the trailers for the first season were also pretty good. And so I thought, yeah, I mean, there's nothing in these trailers to deter me from season 2, but there's nothing in these trailers that inherently gets me so pumped and so excited about season 2 that I go, yeah, I just cannot wait to watch Rings of Power season 2. So they dropped all 3 episodes at once. And I went through each episode. I watched each episode, not in one sitting. I watched, I think, episodes 1 and most of 2 in one day, and then the rest of it the next day. And let's go through it, and then I'll give my overall thoughts as we go along. So episode 1, again, full spoilers if you have not seen Rings of Power. I just talked a lot about non-spoilery things for Rings of Power season 2. So this is your final warning, spoiler alert for season 2 of Rings of Power. Let's finally dive into it. Okay, so in episode 1, one of the things that I loved, and I'm not gonna bury the lead here. I loved episode 1. I at first was a little bit lukewarm on the episode until I realized what was happening, and I'll kind of explain what that was in just a second. But what I loved about episode 1 is that you are getting the full brunt of the A storyline, and the A storyline is Sauron, Sauron, Sauron. It's everything to do with Sauron and his rise to power. I think it just said Sauron like 3 different ways in that one sentence, but Sauron, that's what I'm going to go with. You get the full brunt of the A storyline, and I love that because this is what's interesting. It's almost like, not to talk about a show that is, I mean, even more controversial somehow in The Acolyte, but I talked about it last week. One of the things that I think we all kind of thought about The Acolyte was that why wasn't the show about Darth Plagueis the whole time, or the rise of the Sith, right? And that was really a feeling I had about season 1 of The Rings of Power. Is like, okay, you reveal that Halbrand is Sauron at the end of season 1. Mordor comes into existence with the big, font change or whatever. Fine. Why wasn't this the season the whole time? Well, here in episode 1, you start out with Sauron immediately. And I'm going to be honest, guys, I didn't catch this at all. I thought the beginning of this show was just the beginning of, like the continuation from season 1. I thought, oh yeah, so Halbrand somehow turned into this different version of Sauron. I think the trailers also tricked me a little bit, because the trailers and all the art and the banners had Sauron with the longer hair, not looking like Halbrand, and I kind of thought maybe he just transformed in between in between seasons. They just wanted a different look for the character. I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention. So I just kind of thought, oh yeah, like he's confronting Adar, who I'm going to be honest, I completely had no idea what happened to Adar after, I forgot what happened to him after the end of season 1. And so just seeing him again, I was like, oh yeah, sure. So the show completely got me, if that was their intention, because I thought this is just a continuation. Then they kill him. Obviously, he's not dead. And you have this really creepy scene with the kind of sludge, intestines, I don't even know, essence of Sauron, clawing its way back to the earth, and then it turns back into the Halbrand version. And I kind of thought, okay, so he's just going back into disguise or something like that. I don't know. He's on the run or something like that. And then you get these really interesting scenes here where he's traveling to the south, and I still didn't catch this. I don't even know how they were heading towards the south, and I didn't even catch this. But he runs into these sailors, and I actually think there's a really interesting and kind of poignant bit of writing here where he's talking to that sailor, and that guy goes, he asks, how are you going to be good, or how can someone be good? And the guy goes, you just got to do it. And then you do it the next day, and it's hard, but you got to do it the next day and keep doing it until it's part of your nature. There are actually some really well-written scenes in this, in the beginning of this show that I wanted to point out here. Not all the writing is good. There are some bits of writing that are a little bit cringeworthy, as well. But that scene in particular was really good. It made me wonder, okay, is there a little bit of remorse with Sauron? What's going on here? Is he kind of turning to good? That was something that I was like, maybe we don't really do that. I don't need Sauron in particular to be that sympathetic villain. I want him to be the cunning, manipulative, kind of villain. Sure enough, that's him. Like, he immediately turns his back on the guy, takes the necklace thing, and then he is on his way. And then when he was on the broken ship, I finally got it, and he reaches out for Galadriel, and I went, oh, this is the beginning of season 1. And that was, I don't know, that was really, really smart to me. Maybe you guys got it in the first 5 seconds of the show, and you're like, that was boring, it was dumb, it was stupid. I'm just telling you what my experience was. I actually thought, really, really, really good beginning. I love how they're setting you up for how Sauron, became Halbrand, right? Little interesting, his powers, that he's able to just kind of be goop and then turn into another person. It's kind of interesting. But then how, he got to interact with Galadriel, and then how Galadriel, obviously the entirety of season 1 is her kind of wavering and trusting Halbrand, and then you get you get what happens later with Halbrand betraying her, which I think I just really, really loved that opening. This series also still looks gorgeous. And I mean, the cinematography, you can tell, CGI, everything, just it looks great. It feels like they spent the dollars wisely. Whether or not they did, we'll have to see what the budgets are. But at least from what it looks like, it looks like you could totally watch this in a theater and be totally, like, yeah, this is meant for a theater. But yeah, I mean, what's different about episode 1 to me is just that it feels like the show has purpose, because it's all about Sauron, right? So, you have Halbrand returning now picking up after the end of season 1, returning to Mordor and talking with Adar, and kind of negotiating his way out of it, and going to Celebrimbor, which I think is really interesting. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's so refreshing to see, and you get all this conflict now with Galadriel and Elrond, because the rings are corrupting, right? The rings are corrupting the different elves, and Elrond is very steadfast. He says, no, we shouldn't be doing this. And I really think that that's working particularly well. I also love how at the end of this episode, they wear the rings and the trees are coming back, but you can kind of tell this is not the way it's supposed to be, right? Just how like the one ring makes you invisible. And that seems cool and all, especially to Bilbo at the beginning of A Fellowship of the Ring. but it's not. That's sort of part of the corrupting nature of the One Ring, and I think that this is a theme that's going to be playing out, is that in these other rings, because I don't think the One Ring is going to appear until maybe season 3 or 4 if they happen, but I think that this season in particular is going to be, I think, very clearly about the other rings, right? The Elven rings, the Dwarvish rings, and the rings for men. And I think it's so interesting that it's not just clear cut. It's not like, oh, you wear the ring and you become evil. It's like, no, the rings are doing good things for you, but that's what temptation is, right? The temptation for greed and for power get you good things sometimes, but they almost inevitably lead to your downfall, which I think is so interesting. So yeah, episode 1, really loved it. Now, I did not mention, because this is also part of episode 1, that there is a little bit of an interlude to the I'm going to call it Gandalf storyline, because I think it's so obviously Gandalf, but if it's not Gandalf, then I'll be surprised. But yeah, the Gandalf storyline with the Harfoots, the Hobbit people, are they Hobbit adjacent? I don't even know what Harfoots are, but the Gandalf storyline, which I still maintain is just not that interesting. I think that I don't know, maybe the Gandalf storyline will end up coalescing around something. Like, eventually, I'm sure what they want is Gandalf to be a part of that final battle with Isildur, where, with the One Ring, like the little prologue flashback that they have at the beginning of Fellowship of the Ring, the movie. I'm sure that they want Gandalf there, and, some origin story about Gandalf the Grey or whatnot. But I'm not that invested in this. I mean, they're just walking around for the most part, and Gandalf sees visions, but it's a bit of a slow burn, and I just frankly have no idea where it's going. There is a scene with a wizard, I think, in episode 2. We'll get there, I guess, in a second. But, maybe that's what it's hinting towards, but not entirely sure. But yeah, I mean, after episode 1, I was like, this is off to a great start, Can't wait to see what happens in episode 2. So we get to episode 2, and I'll say that episode 2 is probably my least favorite out of the 3, because I think that a lot of the momentum that we had in episode 1 is almost immediately halted here. And look, I mean, from a dialogue perspective, from a performance perspective, I enjoyed Durin a lot in season 1. I think that him and Elrond had a really good chemistry. I'm really sad that they're not together that much in this season so far. But I'm just not that invested in Durin, his wife, and Durin's dad. I'm just not. I mean, fine and all. And to be fair, right, the Durin plot becomes more interesting and important in episode 3. So at the very least, it's not like they're just throwing it away for no reason. There's a particular reason that you're including this subplot here, because the dwarves are very important. Obviously, the ring's made for the dwarves, right? So it's not entirely useless. But I'm not gonna lie and say that at the beginning, I get it, like all the earthquakes and stuff are shaking the mountain and whatever. But I'm just not that interested in the Durin subplot, just to be frank. I think that it's interesting, to now look at and then see the post the elves putting on the rings, how Sauron's spirit is almost embedded in these rings, right? And there's an interesting dilemma that's brought up at the end of this episode here, where you get the idea, right? Because on the one hand, there's this big debate. This is, I think, the best part of this episode, to be frank. You have Elrond and Galadriel fighting, right, over whether or not to use the rings. And the dilemma here is so interesting in that, you can see one perspective where it's like, no, these rings were made of our own accord, which they're not, by the way. They're clearly being manipulated by Sauron. But the one perspective is these rings were made to destroy Sauron, right? That's why we need them. And then the other perspective is that no, Sauron intentionally gave us these rings to destroy us. And that's why. I think it is more of the latter, obviously. But I also think that a little bit of the former has some truth in it as well. And that I think that, it's the very classic temptation of we could use the biggest weapon against our enemy, kind of thing. And I don't think that's untrue. I just think that the elves and the dwarves and the men will ultimately fall victim to it until their triumphant moment when they defeat Sauron at Mount Doom. Before Fellowship of the Ring and that prologue and whatever. But I think it's just such an interesting argument that they're making here is, these rings have this seductiveness, this temptation that actually makes a lot of sense. And, you totally buy why Elrond is standing one way and saying, no, we can't be using this. And then why, what's his name? Kindar? Círdan. I don't remember his name. But the guy that, Elrond entrusts the ring to in episode 1, and he goes and tries to destroy it, and he just can't. And then they hold on to it, which I think is just so interesting. So yeah, I mean, again, the part about Durin and Disa, I think, his wife, I just don't find to be that interesting, but the stuff about Elrond and Galadriel, really interesting. Speaking of less interesting, obviously we went to the Harfoot and Gandalf subplot, but then it seems like Nori and Poppy are dead, which I think is kind of interesting. That's one way to write out characters of a story, which is kind of cruel and kind of mean. You could have just written them out to begin with, but I don't know, maybe they're not dead. They're probably not dead. Just sort of an interesting thing, because they also keep doing this. Like in episode 3, Theo is kind of written out in the same way, but he's clearly alive, so who knows what's happening on this level. But yeah, we also get, again, even, speaking of the better scenes in this episode, we get scenes with Sauron again. He's with Celebrimbor, and am I mispronouncing that? Celebrimbor? I don't know, maybe. You'll have to let me know in the comments down below. But he's with the smith, and he turns into this different form. He's so manipulative. He's like, I am the Lord of Gifts, and I'm here to save you. And I just think that's so cool, right? This is what the series should have been about the entire time, is Sauron manipulating these different groups of people, the elves, the men, and the dwarves, to fight amongst themselves while he is seeking to forge the One Ring and rule all of Middle-earth. I think that is just so awesome. So we head into episode 3. That's sort of the state of play. And episode 3, I think, is okay. I think episode 2 is kind of teetering on not that interesting to okay. I think episode 3 is in the very solid camp. Episode 1 I loved, by the way. I still think episode 1 is easily the best episode out of any of the episodes that I watched of Rings of Power. But episode 3, I think, is heading in the right direction, but it's still just okay. And really, that boils down to the fact that there's just not enough Sauron in this episode. And I think that is such a funny thing to say, because obviously Sauron is the big bad. But that storyline is just endlessly fascinating to me. And yeah, I wanted more Sauron, more Mordor. What's interesting about the show, though, is that while each episode is not individually switching between all the different characters, it seems like they're reintroducing characters in a staggered way, which I think is fine. I just wonder if they're going to have to rush, for example, Isildur's storyline in 4 episodes instead of 8 episodes, or however long the season is, because they introduced him in episode 3, or because we didn't really get, Gandalf that much. They're going to rush his storyline in episode 6 or whatever. I kind of hope that's not the case here. Critics have seen the whole show, and some of them do seem to like the show a lot this season, and so we'll have to see about that. But yeah, this episode is about Isildur, who I don't know, I've been spoiling a lot of Lord of the Rings already, but if you haven't seen Lord of the Rings, kind of an important character at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring. So, and again, not to spoil the first 3 minutes of the Fellowship of the Ring, but yeah, going to be a kind of important character moving on. So I think it's interesting that we're going to have to build this character up, because I don't particularly find him that interesting, honestly, at this point. He has speaking of those really well-written conversations, he has one of those with the other woman who I'm struggling to remember her name. A lot of new characters also, just in addition to like the mountains and mountains of pre-existing characters. But he has the conversation about I think about grieving, right? Or not just grieving, but it was about guilt and I think grace, which I think is super interesting, right? Because it's about how Isildur is talking about his mother and saying she died and she died to save me, and I've been living my life ever since to repay that, and I just can't. And it's just this conversation about how to live with guilt in light of the grace of someone else's sacrifice is just so interesting and profound to me. With big even religious undertones. J.R.R. Tolkien was a Christian, and you definitely see a lot of parallels there. But anyways, I think that I think there are those pockets of really well-written dialogue that make me hope that there's something really big there for the show to kind of to deal with and to grasp. But yeah, I mean, aside from that, Theo's back. Theo, not my favorite character, actually probably one of my least favorite characters in season 1. Feel bad that the mother died. But yeah, the whole Arondir and Theo storyline, I don't know, not that interesting. He kind of fake dies in this episode, but not really. I'm sure he's alive. And then the other big part of this episode was about the Queen Regent, which I thought was pretty boring up until the very end, which I thought okay, we're getting to the coronation. She's going to get coronated and there's going to be some unrest, but it happens and then we move on. What I wasn't expecting, though, was actually the whole uprising to happen. That's definitely not what I was expecting, because then all the people kind of rise up. The eagle shows up out of nowhere, which I think is kind of funny, and then we get kind of a coup in the middle of that ceremony, which I think, again, really, really fascinating. And going back to the actual storyline that I think is the most interesting, we of course get our Sauron moments where he's talking with Celebrimbor and he is forging the rings for the dwarves. And I just think, again, give us more of that stuff. The episode ends, I think, on that note, and I need more of that Sauron plot. If you just keep going back and forth, like if all of next episode is about Gandalf with 5 minutes of Sauron, I'm going to be a little bit unhappy, because that is really what's working for this show so far. So in summation, because we've been talking a lot about each of the individual episodes, but I just, to close out this episode of the Access Blockbusters pod, wanted to just give my quick thoughts on the series, or not the series as a whole, but the 3 episodes as a whole. I think that they're good. They show promise. Now, it's interesting because it's not like these 3 episodes, in my opinion, are very even. I think that, like I said, I loved episode 1. I thought episode 2 was not the greatest, but it was okay. And then I think episode 3 was fine, if not, decently solid. And it's not the best outcome if you're hoping for season 2 to be a massive upgrade from season 1, but there is promise with this show. This show feels like it has more direction now in season 2 than it had in season 1. And I think that with all of that said, we can expect a lot of really interesting things to come, as long as they keep focusing on the Sauron plot. And look, if all these other storylines eventually, and by eventually I mean hopefully soon, coalesce around that Sauron plot, the Gandalf storyline, because like I mentioned, I should have talked about this a little bit more in episode 2, but we did get another wizard that showed up. Is that Saruman? I don't know, maybe, could be another random wizard, but anyways, as long as all these subplots begin to coalesce around the Sauron subplot, because eventually what we're building towards, right, is just the all-out war, which might be season 3 or season 4, whatever they're planning on. But just, as long as we're getting towards that that main storyline, I think it'll be a good thing moving forward. So yeah, let me know if you've seen all 3 episodes of The Rings of Power. I've just spoiled them all in great detail. So if you have not, apologies, but let me know if you have. Let me know what you think about the show so far in the comments down below. And with that, guys, that'll do it for this episode 38 of the Access Blockbusters pod. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode. It has been a joy, again, to join you and to just talk about some of these really fun things. Next week, we'll probably be doing a preview of the Penguin, and maybe even Agatha, or maybe we'll do a preview of Agatha the next week. But a lot of fun stuff coming up. And I should have mentioned during the Rings of Power actual segment that it's going to be fun because we'll have things to talk about for many weeks to come. I think there will be a couple weeks in late September where mid to late September where we'll have episodes of Agatha, Penguin, and Rings of Power going at the same time, which I think is really exciting. I miss those days where you had just so much to talk about, in addition to all the other fun stuff that's been going on with movies and television shows. So stay tuned for that. It's going to be a very exciting time here on the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel. Again, if you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters channel, make sure to do so. Give this video a like. Let me know what you think about the podcast in the comments down below. Or if you're watching on Spotify, make sure to leave a rating. If you're listening on Spotify, I should say. And that'll do it for me for this episode, guys. And I will see you guys in the next one.